Hey folks, it's Jake from Wani, and I am here with Chrigel Glanzmann, the frontman for Eluveitie. How are you going, Chrigel?
Hello, and thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for spending some time with us today to talk about the band's upcoming album, Ategnatos. So, I guess I want to start straight off talking about the album. It's a very intense album. It's intense from both a musical but also a raw emotional perspective. So I guess firstly, before we dive into the finer details, was it difficult to channel your energy into creating an album that was that packed with so much intensity?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's nice to hear that you perceive it that way. So do we, to be honest. And no, it absolutely felt not difficult or something. It's one of the, let's say, quicker albums. I mean, we have, for most of our albums, actually, we have been working longer than for Ategnatos. And yeah, everything just kind of grew organically and just kind of fell into place. And I would say the main driving force in the creative process was actually intuition. So we didn't think too much, and so no, it didn't feel complicated or anything like that.
Well, that's good to hear, and that is something that we're going to touch on a little bit more later on in the conversation about the writing process and that. But I guess I want to ask, so every band obviously wants their latest album to be their best musically and also sales-wise, but without that in mind, were there any purely personal goals that you wanted to achieve or that you have achieved on this album that you're looking forward to listeners hearing?
Actually, to both things you just said, I would have to say no, actually. Hard to say. I mean, well, to be honest, actually, we don't really think about our own music in that sense, you know. I mean, of course, you know, with each production you learn. Of course, you make experiences, and of course, with every album production you do, there's things that you learn or that you want to do better the next time and stuff like that. That's very natural, normal, I think. Yeah. But it's really not. I mean, if we start creating a new album, it's really not that we think, okay, this album needs to be better than the last one or anything like that. Because, you know, like, we like our previous albums. Yeah. So we think they're good, and we're happy with them. So yeah, actually, there's no thoughts like this, and in that sense, also not exactly goals, you know. And I mean, when I start working on a concept for an album, or also the music or the lyrics, or basically anything that goes into the album as a full project, the only thing that really matters to me is that you know, all the feelings that you have, all the emotions go into it, and also all the passion and you know, all these things. That's basically what we focus on and what we want. So this is, if there's a goal, that is the goal, I would say. So to make sure that the album really does express what it's supposed to, you know. Yeah,
definitely. Now, I do want to touch back on the album and the overall sound of it. So for me personally, as a listener, it seemed like a very clear callback to the band's roots. So a lot of the foundations of the tracks on Ategnatos seem reminiscent of the strengths of some of your earlier releases, but obviously displaying a lot of growth on those earlier strengths. So did you revisit some of your earlier works when preparing for this album?
At some point I did, but for another reason, and it's kind of, I think it's kind of cool that you mentioned that, because we think the same way. But actually this just kind of happened. It wasn't intentional. We didn't start writing the music with the idea, okay, let's go a bit back to the roots or something like that. It's more, we were in the middle of the writing process of the album, and or actually even further, it was quite advanced already. And at the same time, I was asked for bonus material for the re-release of our album Slania. It's we had a reissue of our album Slania because it was the album's 10th anniversary, and there was just this idea of like re-releasing it as an anniversary edition. And Nuclear Blast asked me for bonus material, and we thought that could be quite interesting to hear, or to get our fans to hear the old demos that we recorded at home before we went to the studio to actually record Slania. And so I just browsed through these old hard drives that I still had somewhere on the attic to look for them, and to go through these old demos, these homemade demo recordings of the songs that went on Slania back then. And when I did so, that's actually when I kind of realized that our new songs that we just wrote or were writing for Ategnatos, that there was something about these songs that kind of actually reminded me much on the songs on Slania, and that a lot of songs from Slania could also be on Ategnatos or the other way around. But as I said, that wasn't intentional. I basically just noticed when I was browsing through all these old recordings again after all these years.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's really interesting to hear, and it was definitely something that I sort of picked up on, that older sort of influence. So I guess for me as a fan, one thing that's always struck me as remarkable with Eluveitie's music is the way that the band manages to layer the multitude of different instruments that you guys have at your disposal, and you do it in a way that retains very true not only to the folk metal origins of some of these instruments and the folk music origins, but also the death metal origins. So is it difficult when writing a record, particularly something like this record, where there is some very clear sort of dichotomy between the two different styles, and striking a balance there?
I don't think so, honestly. As I said before, I mean, the whole process of writing these songs, sorry, usually feels not only for this album, but in general, this process usually feels very, how do you say, very natural somehow. And I almost want to say, like, it feels like just breathing. It just feels like the most natural thing to do. And so in that sense, no, it's absolutely not difficult or complicated or something. But I also have to say, I don't know exactly how this works, but our songs usually just kind of fall into place somehow. Yeah. They just grow in my head, and usually they grow with everything that is, so when I work in a song, at some point I just kind of hear it in my head, and I hear it with all the instruments and all the harmonies and all that kind of stuff. So that it doesn't feel complicated or difficult or something. The actual difficulty in the whole thing is basically that I have this tendency to just always put in too much. But I guess it's a matter of taste. Me personally, I just love this. I just love if music creates this harmonic sound wall that just kind of overrolls you with a billion different details that you perceive, but you actually don't hear them exactly because there's so many things going on at the same time. Personally, I love this, but obviously this is the total nightmare of every producer who is supposed to mix an album, and that's usually when we clash, the producer and myself. That's usually the challenge, but but not the composing and the writing of the songs, actually.
Yeah, cool. So with Ategnatos, you guys, it was a condensed process recording this one. Normally you allow yourself a fair bit of time, but I understand that you only had 4 weeks while recording this process, and that you had everyone in the studio as opposed to just yourself and one of the other band members, like it has happened previously. So with all of that going on, I've read that there was a lot of spontaneity that sort of popped up during the recording process. Now, are there any moments that sort of stand out that were born out of that spontaneity that you can point to for some of the listeners on the new album?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as you correctly said, that we had very little time to record the album. And simply due to the fact that the studio where we usually record was just, already well booked out when we asked them, and we didn't want to postpone the whole album, the whole release for like half a year. But we also did not want to just go to a different studio and work with an engineer that we don't know. So there was basically the only chance to just try to get through it and make it happen, and we did. But it was. It was a rather sleep-sacrificing endeavor, and yeah, also there was a lot of things, still open. I mean, on one hand, that was kind of intentional. We actually did leave a lot of things open when we went to the studio, and we just left a lot of things open for just spontaneous creativity and stuff. But some other things also just kind of emerged due to the fact that, we just had actually too little time to record.
Yeah.
So the whole process was indeed marked by much just spontaneous occurrences that, and one of them, for instance, is ended up in the fact that we didn't, for the first time, not work with a hybrid string orchestration, which means that in the past we've been working with companies that usually work for the film industry or advertisement movies and stuff like that, and usually they record a few lines on all the string instruments such as violins and cellos and stuff, and all the rest is programmed, and that's how we usually work. And this time, for the first time ever, we basically just had like real strings on the album. So we have been working with a classical string quartet, and this was something that wasn't planned and that basically just occurred during the studio. And the reason was that we were running out of time. I remember I was sitting in the kitchen of the studio, which kind of was my working place there, and Fabienne. She was just recording vocals, and at some point she just came to the kitchen to get herself a tea or something, and I just randomly started complaining and moaning, and I was like, oh my god, this is so much. And I have to say, I was just about to work on the on all the orchestra parts. I just started composing all the parts for the orchestra, and I just complained to her, and I was like, this is so much, and I really don't know, like, how am I supposed to manage to get all this in time like this? It's just too much and too little time, and I don't know how, blah blah blah, and so I was just complaining. And then at some point Fabi was maybe I know someone who could help us out here, and it turns out it's a friend of her who works at the Zurich University of Arts, where she's teaching film score, film music composing. And so I was like, of course, ask her, please. That sounds very good. And so this young woman named Miriam, she came to the studio a few days later, and the chemistry was just amazing right from the start. And on a personal level, but also like in a musical level, like we just totally matched in our perception and ideas of how this all should sound like and stuff. And well, she also knew and liked our music before, so that was
That definitely
kind of a good
helps.
start. So we started working together on the orchestrations. He helped me a lot and took a lot off me, and like this, it worked. And at some point, she just called me and she said, like, you know, tomorrow my students have a day off, and some of them actually don't have really much to do, so why don't we give them some homework? And I was like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And so she basically made the recording of the orchestra parts of Ategnatos, basically a project for her students who recorded them like all in 2 days, I guess. So that's how this came up, you know, and it was amazing, of course. It was also cool for all the students to be part of it, and yeah, it was just kind of a win-win thing. But yeah, there's during the production of this album that there were a lot of things like this just happening, so unexpected things that you probably would never have thought of if you were supposed to plan them, you know.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah, it is good. It's definitely good. Now, Chrigel, I've got one more question for you before we sign off here. So, Ategnatos is the Gaulish word for reborn. Now, I know that this is the second release that the band has had with the current lineup, and I know that throughout Eluveitie's career, you have had a fair few members roll through the ranks, but do you think maybe that this album title might be making a statement about the band and about the fact that you might now have finally ironed out the lineup to take the band forward?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I of course, this is not the first time that I'm getting this question, and now, like, thinking about it, I totally understand it, of course, but no, really not. I mean, the album deals with pretty deep things, like, you know, with archetypal images that circle around the thought of renewal from Celtic mythology. And the reason why we or how we ended up with this topic was rather some personal experiences and things like that we went through the last couple of years. And yeah, it's really not related to the history of the band or the development of the band.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And I guess just on that topic there, like you mentioned, the album being rooted in Celtic mythology, are you sort of happy that you might have shined a bit of light onto Celtic mythology through the band's work? Because I know there are a lot of people that may not necessarily have been aware of it before listening to the band, but have now taken the time to go and, I guess, investigate it a little bit further.
Sorry, excuse me. I don't know, honestly. I mean, to be fair, normally and so far on every album, I most of all basically wrote the lyrics for kind of myself. You know, like it was basically just an outlet of things and thoughts and emotions that just mean a lot to me personally. You know, it was kind of my personal way of dealing with these things, you know, and we never cared that much if people deal with our lyrics or not. So in that sense, there's never an attempt to, you know, to spread anything, to spread any mythology or history or thoughts on it or messages or whatever, you know.
Yep.
And so yeah, that never really was our goal. And to be fair, it changed a little bit for Ategnatos, and still, of course, it's not, you know, it's not spreading like much of a message or something like that. I'm just really not a big fan of that. Even though I know that music is something very, very powerful, I'm still not a fan of using music as a medium to, you know, spread any kind of ideas or whatever, you know, like this. I'm a musician, and I rather leave these things to politicians and priests and, you know, all these people. Yeah, very well said. They can spread their ideas if they think it's needed, but I won't. But nevertheless, you know, we have been like really contemplating these deep archetypal images of and parables and allegories of Celtic mythology. Not just, to get the lyrics, but we actually contemplated them for ourselves and from the viewpoint of our modern everyday lives. And that just turned out to become a very, very intense and also personal experience that eventually all ended up in this album, or let's say the album kind of is a result of that process, of that experience and journey, I would also say. And it just naturally kind of took us so much further than we ever expected it would. And in that sense, Ategnatos became a much more personal album and even actually a pretty social-critical one in that sense, which, again, actually what wasn't really planned like this.
Yep.
And it wasn't even expected by ourselves. It just developed like that while, dealing in depth and contemplating these ancient words of wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Chrigel, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to getting our hands on Ategnatos when it releases on the 5th of April.
Well, thank you so much again for having me and for your time and for the interview.